Hey YouTube, today I'm going to be showing you how I built my motorized bike using a two-stroke Chinese motorized bike kit and a Granite Peak mountain bike that you can get from Walmart. Now my old roommate left me this bike for free because he couldn't fit it in his car when he moved out. And since I already have a nice mountain bike, and this bike is too heavy to be any sort of use on the trails, I thought it would be cool to make a commuter bike that I could use to zip around town faster than I could pedal. It goes about 20 to 25 miles an hour and it is a hell of a lot of fun to ride. Now over the course of this video, I'll be going over the sequence I took to assemble it and the troubleshooting steps I took to get it running. So this kit I bought was $130 off of eBay, and it was the cheapest I could find with the quickest shipping time, which is an issue because all of these kits come from China, and I bought this during the peak of the coronavirus crisis. So all these kits, no matter, you'll find tons of them on eBay. They are pretty much all exactly the same, so just buy the cheapest one you can find. I preferred to buy the non-painted kit rather than the black painted ones because I was thinking that the paint would melt away or emit fumes because this motor gets very, very hot. Now the kit took about a week to arrive and came in, which I would say, very good condition upon visual inspection. It wasn't missing any parts. However, the instruction booklet that I got reads like it was poorly translated from Chinese, so I scrapped it after reading it once. But that wasn't really much of an issue because you can find tons of information about these kits online through a simple Google search. So before you start putting this bike together, here are some tools that I strongly recommend you have. First, you'd want a quality socket and ratchet set just to tighten all the bolts. Many of these bolts are very different sizes, and so therefore you just kind of want a whole universal set. Next, you want just some standard Phillips head and Allen head screwdrivers and some pliers for the electrical components. Next, you're gonna either want a set of files or a grinder. Now, there are a number of parts on this Granite Peak bike that will get in the way of the motorized bike kit, most notably the water bottle holders and the air filter. So you're either going to have to file or grind them down. I chose to use the grinder, but you can use files if you'd like. And then besides that, a drill, some WD-40, and some thread locker, which is extremely important. You want to, this motorized bike is going to be vibrating a whole lot, and you're going to want to put thread locker on every single bolt so nothing comes loose. And then finally, you're going to want to use a chain breaker to break the chain. The chain is too long for this bike, and although there are other ways to break a chain, such as using a nail and a hammer or just kind of prying it with a screwdriver, chain breakers aren't very expensive, and this one was I found on Amazon for I think about $10. Oh, and then you're also going to want some Teflon tape for the fuel system so it doesn't leak. So the first step I took was mounting the rear wheel sprocket onto my bike wheel. And this component came with 4 separate parts. The sprocket itself, 2 rubber pads, and then a backing plate. So how I assembled this was pretty straightforward. I just lined the screws right there up with the sprockets and tightened it in a star pattern so that it was as centered as possible and wouldn't wobble when my back wheel moved. You can test this out once it's done by just kind of lifting the back end of the bike up and spinning the wheel, and it should be very, very straight if you have tightened it correctly. Now, the bike frame is not compatible with the existing mount. The V right there is just a little bit too wide, so I was recommended by a couple online videos that I found to use the universal mount in its place. And I tried it on. The universal mount basically just consists of a flat plate and a U-bolt that goes right around there. And I really didn't like how that looked, and I didn't think it would bode well with all the vibrations that this motor caused. So instead, I bought some M8 coarse thread bolts from Home Depot, removed the existing threaded rod using the 2-bolt method, and inserted a 55 millimeter M8 bolt as well as nut in its place. And to even out kind of the placement of this motor mount with the frame, I threw a piece of cardboard in there to act as a shim and provide a better contact area. Next, you want to mount your chain. So in order to do that, you want to start by removing the front clutch cover, which is right there, using just a standard hex key. And then you want to use a 13 millimeter socket. There is a little bolt inside there that you can rotate with the socket, and you want to rotate it, I'm pretty sure it is counterclockwise, and start feeding the chain through the sprocket inside of the clutch case. And once you've done that, you just feed it through until you have a reasonable length to connect 2 points of the chain, and then you have your chain fed through. So you want to shorten your chain to a reasonable level of tension. I personally like to tension it up to a point that you can pull it off while pushing the chain to one side while rotating the wheel, and it should just slide off the sprocket, and it should be able to do the same thing if you're trying to put the chain back on the sprocket. And you're going to break it using this chain breaker right here. And simply how it works is you just put the chain through that point right there. You turn this little knob and it should break the point. Now, when breaking a chain, you want to ensure you're using 2 outer links so that the master link that comes with the kit is able to connect the chain. Now, once you have the chain installed, you simply throw on the tensioner and tension the chain to a point where it is not too tight and there is still a little slack in the chain. Now, the tensioner doesn't look very secure, and it's not, but you can increase that by drilling a hole through the center of the tensioner through the frame and then bolting it up on the other side. So just one more thing to add. Due to the shape of the frame and the distance from the motor to the sprocket, it's inevitable that this chain is going to rub up against the frame. It only does so slightly. It's kind of difficult to hear it, but you can reduce this by slightly filing this area right here or grinding it. I didn't want to grind it just because I didn't want to take too much material away by accident, but I did file it slightly, and it does make it a little quieter and reduces the friction, increasing your speed slightly. So on the left side of the bike, you can now remove the handle pad from the handlebar using a squirt of WD-40 and a Phillips head screwdriver to work it in there and install the clutch lever. We want to feed the cable through the clutch hole right there, down on the bike, and then towards the clutch handle on the motor itself. Now, there is a spring assembly you can use as well, and you want to feed it through that hole right there, attach it to this heat shield spring, and then secure it using a hold bolt that you can buy in pretty much any bike store. Either they'll give it to you for free. I bought this for 50 cents, and this does a really good job at ensuring that the clutch lever is able to pull the clutch lever. Now, you wanted this tight to a point that when you do engage the clutch lever, you can almost hear a faint popping sound, and that is the clutch itself being engaged. In my opinion, this was the most difficult part about building this motorbike because there are a whole lot of small parts inside this carburetor that tend to fall out of their desired places if you tilt it around a little bit. So be very, very careful when assembling it. Now, due to the frame size of this bike, the carburetor, in fact, did not fit in between the V of the frame So I had to purchase an extended mount, a 32 millimeter extended mount right there, which slightly offsets the carb so that it can in fact clear the frame. And it was $8 on eBay. You're gonna have to buy one of these if you're using this bike, so I would definitely recommend it. And then the air filter itself, even though it was outside of the frame, it was still too big and would not allow the carburetor to go to its proper place on the intake manifold. So I had to file down the left side, the side of the air filter that is hitting the frame slightly so that you can squeeze it in. It doesn't really matter if you file it down because it's just plastic, so just something to keep in mind. After you have the carburetor installed, you want to remove the handle pad on the right side of the bike and install the throttle and kill switch. So when you're installing the throttle and kill switch, they both fit together. You want to drill a hole into the center of the kill switch so that when you're flicking the throttle back, the kill switch and the throttle assembly won't rotate around the handle. Now the throttle cable will go around here and then up there and then into the throttle, into the carb itself where it is able to control the throttle. To test it out, you want to flick this back and you should hear the throttle go up and down as a result. It should make a little bit of a clicking noise, and that's how to test that it's working. For the gas tank, you want to mount the gas tank as close to the front of the bike as you can, and then assemble the petcock, the fuel filter, and then use tubing to connect it. Then you got your CDI, and you simply can just use the screws that come with the kit and the mount and just connect it to the frame. You want it to be, you can really connect it anywhere, but you want it to be somewhat far away from the motor because the wires attached to it, they don't really like heat, and you don't want the shrink wrap on there to melt. So just try and keep the wires away, as far away as you can from the motor. So now you can hook up the wires to the CDI. The CDI has two sets of wires, a blue wire and a black wire. So you want to connect the black motor wire to the CDI black wire, and then the blue motor wire to the CDI blue wire. Now I've heard there is a number of different colored wires that come from the kill switch, and there isn't really set thing you can do, but one of them is most likely going to be a green wire, which signifies ground, and you want to connect that green wire to the blue CDI wire, and then the black or white or whatever other color wire that is coming from the kill switch, you want to connect to the only other available open port on the CDI, which on this case it was the black wire. Now for the fuel, you want to fill up the gas tank with a 16:1 gas to oil ratio using at least 91 octane fuel. For 16:1 basically means for 1 gallon, 1 gallon of fuel, you want 8 ounces of oil, and Harbor Freight sells these perfectly sized 8-ounce two-stroke synthetic oil. Now to prime the carburetor, you want to hit this tickle button a couple of times, and you should see once it's primed an air bubble moving through the tubing. That means that the carb is receiving fuel and that it is ready to go. Now the first day that I got this built, I tried in vain for about an hour to get this thing to start, going up hills and trying to pedal down from whatever videos I could find online, and I just couldn't do it. So I had to troubleshoot this bike. So I've done some maintenance on go-kart engines, and I've built a couple go-karts before. So there are 3 things, kind of building off my knowledge from that, there are 3 things you need to check for in really any small engine to get it to run, and that is spark, compression, or fuel. So the first and the easiest thing to check is the spark. So what you do there is temporarily remove the spark plug cap, unscrew the spark from the engine, reinsert the spark into the spark plug cap, and then what you want to do is being very careful not to touch the spark plug itself. Ride your bike around for a little bit with the clutch engaged and touch the end of the spark plug to the frame. You should hear a bit of a zapping sound when you're riding, which you don't have to look down, but if you can hear the noise, that means that you're getting spark, and that means your spark is good to go. If you find that you're still not getting spark, there are a couple of avenues you could take to resolve this problem. The first could be that your CDI is defective. You can check that using a multimeter. There's a specific value for resistance that should be read by it. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but if it doesn't fit that, then you should probably get a new CDI. You can also check the magneto inside of the motor. Again, once you check it, it should have with a multimeter, it should have a given resistance value. You can find it online. If it doesn't match it, you may need to remove and replace your magneto. And then third, if those two components are good and your spark plug, you still don't get any spark, you're probably going to need to replace your spark plug or re-gap it. I would just replace it because they're very cheap, and you can find probably better spark plugs online than these cheap Chinese models. Second thing after you check your spark plug is to check your engine compression. This most likely isn't going to be a problem. All you really need to do to check for compression is to ride the bike with the clutch not engaged. And if you hear kind of a sort of pumping noise coming from the engine and you find it very difficult to pedal forward with the clutch not engaged, that means that the pistons inside of the cylinder are going up and down, and that is making it difficult for you to ride, which means you're getting compression. If you're not getting compression, that's not very good. I would say you probably have to either replace the cylinders or I honestly would probably just try and get a refund for the engine, because that one's pretty tough to fix. And the third and final thing you can check is fuel. Now, fuel goes into the engine through the carburetor and the intake manifold, so you want to remove those parts, disassemble them, and ensure that all of the internals are up to par and that nothing is broken. This actually ended up being my major problem, and this is what went wrong with my bike. As I said earlier, the carburetor has a lot of very small components that, when tilted, tend to fall out of place, and I had tilted my carb, and this very small plunger-like component went out of its desired place and was in fact clogging the entryway to the float bowl, preventing fuel from getting there and then preventing fuel from actually entering the engine. So I figured this out. I saw this, I put it back into place, and was very, very careful not to tilt my carb again, and this actually solved the problem and got my engine running. Once you're ready to start this bike up for the first time, you want to go to the top of a relatively steep and long hill, make sure there are no cars around, and start pedaling down the hill with the clutch engaged. You slowly want to release the clutch and apply a little bit of throttle as you're going down the hill, and you should start to hear the motor perk up. As the motor is perking up, do not apply too much throttle. It takes a couple seconds for it to get running, but once it's running, apply a little more throttle to ensure that it's working, and then you're good to go. So some final remarks. This bike was pretty frustrating to put together, but it does make for a very great toy and a very cheap mode of transportation. This Granite Peak mountain bike retail is new, about $100, and the motorbike kit is about $130. With all the extras I bought, totaling to about another $30–40. In total, that's a pretty solid mode of transportation that can get you to and fro places between 20 and 25 miles an hour for around $300, which less than $300 actually. So it is a very good mode of transportation, and would recommend it if anybody's looking for a fun project or a quick way to get around town. So thanks for watching, and hope you liked it.